Hello everybody. Today we're going to be taking notes on section 10-2. This is the section about cell division. You guys have already gotten into this with your vocabulary terms, and you've been modeling this process with the candy. But I want you to get some notes so when we finish up that candy modeling, you understand why the candy thing fits into this chapter. It's a definition you already have. The cell cycle is a series of events that cells go through as they grow and divide. It's the cell schedule. Just like you have a daily schedule that you go through in order that you can get everything done. You can eat when you need to. You can have a break when you need it. You get here to school, take all your classes, do homework, do all the stuff you do outside of school, get some sleep. You have a certain schedule that works the best for you so you can get everything done. Cells have the same thing. And this is what we've been studying. Remember, we're studying this to know the way it's supposed to work. If this goes wrong, cancers can develop, and that's what we're going to learn about is what happens when the cell cycle goes wrong and what exactly is cancer. But first we have to learn how are things supposed to work, and that's the cell cycle. So there's a few things a cell has to do if it's going to go from one cell, say like one skin cell, to two skin cells to make more cells for your body. And here they are. A cell has to copy all of its DNA. To go from one cell to two cells, you have to make a copy of all that DNA so that each of the resulting cells, called daughter cells, have their own copy of all of the directions. Remember all those organelles inside of a cell? Well, you're going to have to make another nucleus so that each cell will have its own nucleus, make more ribosomes, make more rough ER, smooth ER, Golgi apparatus. You have to make a copy of all those things so that each cell has enough to function properly. The cell is going to have to grow bigger. If you're going to take one thing and make it into two, it should grow first. That way the resulting cells are the right size. And then finally, the cell actually has to split into two cells. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to copy that. You already have the definition up top. We're getting ready for a vocab quiz, so you should know what that is by now. And make sure you've written down the 4 things that a cell has to do to divide. And now we're going to take a look at these things, and we're going to put them into the right order. So here's the events of the cell cycle. Now let me take you through this picture a little bit. The first phase we're going to talk about is called interphase. If you look at this picture, interphase starts at about 1 o'clock and goes all the way around. So it starts right around here, goes all the way around to right here. And see this says interphase? That's what these 3 things are. There's 3 parts to interphase. There's this piece of the pie, this bottom piece of the pie, and this left piece of the pie. The first part of interphase is called G1. It stands for gap 1. All I need you to know is the cell is going to grow during G1. So it says growth and normal metabolic roles. Cell's going to grow bigger, and it's going to do what it's supposed to do. If it's your heart cell, it's going to beat. If it's your skin cell, it'll make oil, make hair, do all the things that skin cells do. If it's a lung cell, its normal metabolic role is to get oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. Okay, so after it's doing that, it'll move into the S phase of interphase. The S phase is right here on this piece of the pie, and this is where you copy all the cell's DNA. This takes a really long time because our cells have a lot of DNA, and it's got to be done perfectly. If the DNA is not copied perfectly, that's called a mutation, and that isn't what you think. It doesn't give you superpowers. A mutation is actually bad, and that's why this takes so long. The next part of the cell cycle is over here on the left called G2. That stands for gap 2. So what we have right now is a cell that has gotten bigger than normal. It has 2 copies of DNA. It's going to grow a little bit bigger and get ready for mitosis. What does get ready for mitosis mean? Well, right over here. It's going to copy its organelles so that it'll have twice as many. It'll make the proteins needed for mitosis, like those centrioles, those spindle fibers, all of those things you guys were showing me with the candy. Okay, so once you've written that down, let's look at this picture. So we're done with interphase, this big piece of the pie. We've just finished that. Now we're going to move on to this next part, which is called the M phase. See right here, M? And that's made of mitosis, which is prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. And they didn't label it. But this line right here between telophase and G1, that should say cytokinesis. So let's take a look at those things. So the M phase, write this down please, is actually 2 steps. Mitosis followed by cytokinesis. Mitosis is when you're going to take one nucleus and make it into two nuclei all inside the same cell. So this is what you guys were showing me with the candy. Remember, in prophase, the cell's DNA winds up into chromosomes. The nucleus starts to disappear. Then you go into metaphase, where all of those chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell and they attach to those spindle fibers. The spindle fibers are also attached to centrioles, kind of like on the north and south pole of the cell. Then you go to anaphase, where those chromosomes actually rip in half, and half goes to one set of centrioles, the other half of the DNA goes to the other part of the other half of the centrioles. And then finally telophase, where you get that big figure 8 shaped cell, and you have one nucleus on the one side and one nucleus on the other side. The DNA starts to unwind back in a chromatin. That's what mitosis is. So we started with one nucleus in one cell, and we ended up separating out all those two copies of DNA, so we got two nuclei inside of the one cell. Okay, I need you to write all this stuff. Remember, we're trying to take one cell and make it into two. Each cell has to have its own nucleus that contains a complete copy of DNA for each cell. And we already copied all the DNA during the S phase of interphase. So mitosis is taking those two copies of DNA and making sure the one nucleus gets all the genes and the other nucleus gets another copy of all the genes. So the steps of mitosis equally divide up the DNA into two nuclei, one nucleus for each new cell, but we're still all inside of one cell. We have a big figure 8 shaped cell. It's very thin in the middle with a nucleus in each cell. Okay, let's talk about the next part of M phase. M phase, M does not stand for mitosis because it's mitosis and cytokinesis. Cytokinesis is dividing the cytoplasm, the cell membrane, and all the organelles, and it pinches off to make two cells. So remember, at the end of mitosis, we had one cell with two nuclei and twice the amount of organelles. Cytokinesis occurs and splits the cell into two cells. Cytokinesis, cyto means cell, and kinesis means movement. So this really means the cell moving away from itself. It's actually going to divide into two cells. The two cells that you get out of cytokinesis are called daughter cells. And they're smaller than that original cell we started with. That was called the parent cell. And then, after you have those two daughter cells, the whole process starts again. Let me show you what I mean. I'll come right back to the slide if you need to keep writing. Right here. So, here we have prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. We're in this M phase. I told you this line does not have a label, but that should say cytokinesis. After cytokinesis, you go right back into this part again. Okay, you stay in the cycle, you stay in the schedule. It's kind of like you go to sleep, and then when you wake up, you're right back to eating breakfast again, and you do it all over again. That's what the cell does. So right here, the cell splits in two, and then they both go right here and start growing again. And if they're heart cells, they beat. And then if they need to make more, they do more and more and more. And they just keep going through this cycle constantly. This is their day. This is their cycle. Okay, so we said cytokinesis occurs as mitosis ends, splits the cell in two. The two resulting cells are called daughter cells, and they're smaller than the original parent cell. And then the whole process is going to start all over again, and they go right back into interphase. Now, there's two more questions I want to answer before we're done with this. One question is, when do cells do the cell cycle? Like, are they always dividing? Because that seems like you'd just be gigantic because your cells would always be copying. Well, they don't, and we'll take a look at that. And are there any cells that don't do the cell cycle? Like, if you were to damage them, would they never come back? And the answer is yes. And let's take a look at those two areas. So when do our cells do the cell cycle? Most of the time, our cells are sitting there in interphase. And in interphase, they sit there, that G1, they sit there doing their normal metabolic roles. They do what they're supposed to do in your body to keep you alive. That's what they're doing most of the time. But sometimes they are stimulated to divide. And in section 10-3, we'll talk about what stimulates a cell to divide. There's a couple of things, like growth hormone could make your cells grow. Injury stimulates the non-injured cells to divide, to kind of take the place of those injured ones. So let me just give you a couple quick things here. So when do cells divide? Okay, to replace damaged cells, like when you heal. All right, so when you're healing your body, you have to do the cell cycle to make more cells to take the place of those ones that got damaged. You guys are still growing and developing. I'm done growing and developing, but you guys are releasing growth hormone, makes your bones grow, muscles grow, organs grow, your brain is still growing, you're still establishing all these different connections in your brain. Your cells are doing the cell cycle a lot more often than mine are because you're still growing and developing. And then to replace older, worn out cells. Your cells do not last forever. They have to get replaced. A great example is your red blood cells. They're what makes your blood red. They move around in your body carrying oxygen. Moving around your body kind of beats them up. It kind of tears them up a little bit and they don't work as well. So they only last a few months, and then your bone marrow makes more cells to replace those ones that are wearing out. So your bone marrow is constantly making blood cells to replace the older blood cells that aren't as efficient anymore. So that's when our cells do the cell cycle. Okay, to heal you, make you grow and develop, or to replace older, worn out cells. Okay, not all cells do the cell cycle. This is kind of strange, but this will make sense to you once you think about it. Certain cells of the body, once developed, do not continue to do the cell cycle. I should say cell, not cells. Um, you guys are still growing and developing, so most of your cells still are doing the cell cycle. A cell that's not doing the cell cycle anymore is said to be in G0. That means that cell is outside of the cell cycle. It's not doing G1, S, G2, M phase, followed by cytokinesis, back to interphase, back to mitosis, back to... It does not keep going around and around and around in that picture. They're done. They don't do it anymore. Cells in G0 just do their job, but they do not grow and divide. If you damage them, you don't get any more. And let me show you some examples, and this ought to make some sense to you. Some cells, once you're completely grown and developed, that don't do the cell cycle anymore are heart and nerve cells. And think about it. If someone has a traumatic brain injury, they may not recover from it. They may be mentally impaired for the rest of their life because they won't make brain cells to replace the ones that are dead. Because those brain cells are in G0. You guys are still making brain cells, but I'm not. Once they're gone, for me, they're gone. So I won't make any more. Same thing if someone has a spinal cord injury. They may heal a little bit, but they're never going to reconnect that spinal cord back together again because those nerve cells won't do the cell cycle. They won't make more. There was an actor named Christopher Reeves years ago. He was the original Superman in the movies from the 80s and the 70s. He broke his spine in a horse riding accident. He was paralyzed from the neck down and was never able to recover because his nerve cells wouldn't repair themselves. It's not like breaking a bone where your bones will repair. Your nerves won't. Your heart cells won't. If someone has a really bad heart condition where some of the heart cells die because they don't get oxygen, those heart cells will not come back for them. All right, so that was what we need to talk about for section 10-2. Where we're going next is learning how does your body know when to turn on and turn off the cell cycle. Like how to know when to make more skin, when to make more hair, when to make all that stuff. And also, what are stem cells? Stem cells are hope that a lot of people have of regenerating nerve tissue and regenerating some of these G0 cells. And we'll talk about what are stem cells, why are they controversial, and you guys will become experts on that too. So feel free to rewind this, rewatch it, write down some questions for me, and that kind of sums up section 10-2 for us.